What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fresh Podcast, where we bring everything fresh in entertainment. I'm your host, Drew Brunfman, and joined with me today is the one, the only, Seth. Seth, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Gotcha. And it is just Seth today because we are talking about, if you don't mind me saying, probably one of Seth's favorite franchises, the Hellboy franchise. Specifically, the movie that no one else seems to be talking about right now, probably because of its weird marketing and weird release. But we were talking about Hellboy, the Crooked Man. Went straight to streaming, went straight to rental movie, but definitely kind of underrated and like kind of swept under the rug for a lot of people, especially coming out in October with a lot of other horror movies that are coming out right now. So before we get into too specifics about it, Seth, I just kind of wanted to ask you just general thoughts about, just this film and kind of, your history with Hellboy. I know you're such a big fan of the franchise.
Yeah. So I think starting off with this film, it's going to be pretty clear that its budget is probably its biggest enemy.
Yes. Yes.
This I like there was not even mutterings about like a Hellboy movie in production. Because even whenever there was the David Harbour one that came out in 2019, we knew years in advance that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
There were leaks, there were talks from like the director
There was
and
more
like David
than like
Harbour
one
himself.
trailer. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this, like, quite literally, I feel like we didn't know this film existed till like I think 2 months ago, when they dropped that like first trailer, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. I don't remember. I do a lot of actors that admittedly I don't personally know. I know they've done some stuff. I looked up their IMDb's. I personally don't know. I believe the director behind this also did the Crank movies, which is interesting. If you ever seen those films,
I didn't know that about the director, honestly.
I don't know that for sure. I think when I looked him up, he did something like a Crank or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah. So what we're dealing with here is a pretty much straight to streaming, a straight to streaming film release. I do know that it did have a limited theater release outside of the US. I believe it was in like South America and in Europe, but that was it. And it was also a limited theatrical release. And honestly, it's interesting because this is I feel like Hellboy is still like a very strong IP that people identify with, because honestly, I feel like that first Hellboy movie was part of that like growing interest in superhero films in like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Obviously that was where, like a lot of other people, that was where I was first introduced. I was first introduced to Hellboy through Ron Perlman's depiction of him, through Guillermo del Toro's movie.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with that character. I think the reason I fell in love with Hellboy so much is I love a character and story and world built on contradictions. If you remember in the first movie, Hellboy is for the most part, a devout Catholic, even though he's demon spawn, which I think is a very interesting character bent.
Yeah.
I also always like the way they've handled the supernatural, where there is these weird things where you're dealing with like ghosts and monsters and folklore and elder gods breaching into our existence, but it's also just kind of just Hellboy's like 9 to 5 day-to-day job. It's not anything special than anything else, which is like, I always like that tone of just making something strange and otherworldly so banal and mundane. That's the appeal of Hellboy. I love those movies. I love Hellboy 1 and I love Hellboy 2. Although I think it was not a good film at all. I even found David Harbour's 2019 Hellboy enjoyable in
Yeah.
some degree, like in a very just kind of like I don't know if I want to say so bad it's good. It's just that like it just moved at such a batshit insane pace that like it's kind of hard to believe that was a real movie that came out.
I think that movie gets more hate than I think it deserves. Because I think, first of all, I think David Harper does a really good job. And
He
also,
does. He
yeah,
really does.
and I also will say, like, that movie has some of, if not like, the best creature designs I've ever seen in a film, just period.
That is true.
The
But to be
creatures are,
fair though,
yeah.
that's like the last 15 minutes of the movie though. That's the thing.
I mean,
Is
yes, but all like there's some like because he fights like what were they? It was like the troll things like halfway through like
yes,
the forest.
the three giants he
Yeah,
fights.
like those.
Baba Yaga also he deals with.
Yeah, like that movie has a really good look to it, and I think Rod Perlwood does a good job. Again, I think
David Harbour.
or David Harbour. Sorry, it's too many of them.
I think, yeah, and I think it's like, and I'll argue this, and God, this might have to just be a separate podcast. But what I'll say here is this: is I think my main hangups is that like whereas basically Hellboy went into a Guillermo del Toro, and I think to their strengths, they don't really bother to adapt really. They only adapt parts of Hellboy's story. They don't really pick a specific story to adapt. Um, Whereas the problem with like the Hellboy David Harbour film is they chose to adapt basically the penultimate story to Hellboy's
Yeah,
finale, which is very weird. And not only that, it's a bunch of other different stories that they just sort of cram together, and that's why that film, especially someone like me, I guess I should make this clear. Big surprise. After the Ron Perl movies, and I fell in love with it a couple years back, I really started to get into like the comic books of Hellboy, and I read a lot of them. Not all of them, but I read a good amount. And I just the comics and movie versions of Hellboy, I think have similar themes and core elements to them, but very different depictions of Hellboy, in my opinion, of what that character is. And to their strengths. I think what made Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy movies work so well is that he didn't directly adapt from the comics. He basically took, let's take this niche comic book character and make him work in a film, and make sure that and make it so that he can have a much better mass appeal to the audience. And I think he pulled that off really well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
anyways, so we got that end, and I feel like we are getting the other end of this, where Hellboy the Crooked Man, made on a low budget. It is probably, in terms of both tone and the actual story, the most faithful adaptation of a Hellboy comic.
Yeah. So let me ask you this real quick.
Yeah,
before you get too into it. Before we get too into the story, because I definitely agree with you. I think this one definitely has like the vibes. Even as someone who hasn't read the comics, I've seen all the movies and I've actually seen all the animated things, and I played him in Injustice too. So basically, I know the character perfectly. But from what you've told me and from what I've experienced, this one is the most like fits the vibes of just like this is just a Tuesday for him. But before we get too into the story, I did kind of want to compare and contrast specifically just Hellboy, the character, between our three versions. Because I think Ron Perlman's is good, but as you mentioned earlier, isn't really the comic Hellboy. And then Harper's version is kind of its own thing. It's kind of like the comics, but I think, yeah, this one seems to be even though he doesn't, I don't think his look is exactly right. I'll get into it, but I want your take on it first. This one feels more like vibes of the kind of just like laid back. It's just kind of a Tuesday version of Hellboy. Yeah. So just what are your thoughts on this? Just Hellboy the character compared to our other two versions.
So the best way I can put it is that if we go back to Ron Perlman, which is the one which is the one that most people are familiar with. Um, he is he's a little bit more cocky, headstrong. Not that the Hellboy in the comics aren't like that, but he's a lot more like that in the film. They definitely play up his more prideful, cocky moments, and also he's a lot more quippy. Um, the best way I could put it, and I hate to use this comparison, but it's a very Marvel movie take on what Hellboy would be. Is Ron Perlman's Hellboy? And it works. That's the thing. I want to make it clear that's not a bad thing. It works.
And this
It
works
works
for
for the
like
film
the
it was made.
Marvelization of everything. So it really is kind of like
That's also true.
he kind of brought that forward of just like if you're adapting a sarcastic character to the big screen, kind of make him more like punchy and quick witted. Versus kind of the laid back, more just like I could take it or leave it kind of vibe. This one's a bit more like he's always got a quick-witted comeback for everything someone says. He's a bit more young and lively, yeah.
And it's interesting because technically the Crooked Man one is actually the younger version, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, like, so like, and I think that's what makes Ron Perlman so appealing is that, yes, he's this big hulking demon thing, but instead of speaking in like ye old English, he was raised by World War II commandos and he talks like it too. Yeah. Like he's constantly cursing and just like whenever I will say it's a consistent thing that all the Hellboys get right. And it's something from the comics too. Every time something horrible, like beyond the color of time is happening in front of them, like truly mind-breaking shit, Hellboy's reaction is always, oh crap. Like that is just that is a constant through all of Hellboy, and they always get that right.
Yeah.
So but Ron Perlman pulls it off so well. I think he just brings so much good natural charisma to him. Hellboy's a bit of an idiot. Also, way Ron Perlman plays him, but I think that's a good thing. Like I said, I think that works for that movie.
I definitely think
David Hart.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say I do think in Ron Perlman's version, he probably is like, and again, I love Ron Perlman's version. He probably is my favorite, but I think he might be the stupidest one. At least maybe it comes, or at the very least, like he's the silliest one. But like he does come across as the one. It's like he's not gonna come up. Like none of them are coming up with that clever solutions. But like no one's gonna solve a puzzle. But Ron Perlman's definitely not solving a puzzle anytime soon.
The Hellboy has mostly, even in the comics, Hellboy has always been kind of the character of like, well, shit, maybe if I try punching it harder, it will solve the problem. Ron Perlman really doubles down on that attitude, and he's a lot more cocky about it too. So that's kind of what makes Ron Perlman's version work. Yeah. So I agree, yeah, and I think that's what made him appealing. Then we get to David Harbour's, and David Harbour, I think personally, I haven't seen a lot of stuff in him besides Stranger Things, and the Black Widow movie. But I like David Harbour. I think he's just really fun. And he brings a lot of like, I do feel like that at least the stuff I've seen him in, he never half-asses it. His depiction of Hellboy is probably my least favorite, as in I really don't like it. And that's just because his version of Hellboy is essentially a man-child. That is his personality. He's really into like old 80s metalhead rock. He's like calls everyone like dude or bro. He's constantly in like a pissing match with his adoptive father all the time. It just his general mannerisms he feels more like Tommy Boy than Hellboy. And that's why and here's the thing. I think that's more of a fault of the writing rather than David Harbour himself. I feel like if you handed David Harbour a more serious Hellboy role like this film, I think he would fucking crush it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because David Harbour is the one where he's like he really does not like the film he made. I don't know if you've ever seen interviews of after the fact where he was not really a fan of it. I will say I don't think David Harbour's version is definitely the edgiest. He's definitely like the most like punk rock version of it, like anti whatever. I don't know. I don't hate it. It's definitely different. He definitely stands out from it. And I don't know what. Maybe it is just like because I like David is it Harbour or Harper? I've been saying it wrong.
Harbor. There's
Harper.
a B there.
Okay, it's a B, not a P. Sorry, I might have been saying it wrong earlier, but it's fine. Uh, I think it might just be him under the mask, but like I do kind of like this version of him. Of just kind of like it's fuck everything, but in a different kind of vibe than the other ones. He is a bit more like, yeah, he'll go and solve the problem, but more out of like anger than like ugh, I guess I gotta do it than the others, which isn't necessarily bad. It's different though, and I definitely think you're right. It is the worst of the three. Um, but I can't say that I completely hate it, but I can't also disagree with anything you said. Like you're right, but I'm also like, come on, though. Yeah, that probably
Yeah,
makes
and like that, like I said, I feel like if we ever decide to do like a Hellboy retrospective, we could definitely get into it more. It's also another thing where, admittedly, I have not watched Hellboy 2019 since 2019.
yeah.
I watched it once in theaters and just and I'll say this much: unlike other people, I didn't utterly hate it. I thought it was a fun time, but it became a fun time for me whenever 20 minutes into the film, I was like, I'm not going to treat this like a Hellboy movie. That's what made it fun for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um, and that's unfortunate. But we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I gotta get what you mean. I feel like it's one of those things that we talk about all the time where it's one of the things that sucks when you have a good actor, you know that they're good, and they're stuck into a movie where there's potential, but it's just not a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sucks, you know. Like you just know that like, oh, they could absolutely crush it. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, I feel like I'm ready to move on from David Harbour and
Yes.
actually talk about Jack Kesey.
Yes, Jack
I
Kessie.
hope I'm pronouncing.
I think so.
New
That's
guy.
yeah. He's he's.
Never. Go ahead.
I was gonna say he's been in things before, but I think this is his first lead.
That's good. I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, he's been a lot of like bodyguard number two or like other soldier guy next to the main guy. So this is just kind of like I say big lead. It's still a directed streaming movie, but still, it's a big role for him. Yeah.
Right. And I gotta say, definitely of all the Hellboy depictions I've seen in media, and I'm not talking about just the movies, I'm also talking about his appearance in like video games like in Injustice 2 and stuff like that.
And yeah,
I would probably say he is the closest to the comic books in terms of his mannerisms. There's still, because I think that what you have to understand with the comics is Hellboy is a bit sassy. He's still a sarcastic guy, but he's a little bit more, it comes off a lot more dry in the comics. He's not going out of his way to make a joke or something like that. It's just always something that I think Jack Kesey gets it right, where it's just like he always kind of, it's almost like he's always muttering it under his breath. Because Hellboy in the comics is a lot more like a detective type character. He's a little bit more brooding. He has these like simple one-liners that he's not really saying to anyone. It's always kind of more for himself. And he's just like, he's not all that clever. And I think that Jack Kesey captures that perfectly. Because like Hellboy, what makes Hellboy, I think, work so well in the comics is he has the attitude of the everyman, the working man. He has that kind of attitude condensed down into a supernatural superhero form. And that's what makes Hellboy good. And I think Jack Kesey's like mannerisms works really well. I think of like little scenes where like the spider starts shrinking and he just like, I like them small, or just like whenever he crushes the demon familiar for Cora Fisher and she's like, "Oh, was squashing not good?" It's like, no, squashing's good.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, those little moments where it doesn't bring a lot of attention to himself of the quip. He's just like making it is
Yeah.
just, I think, works really well.
I think
Um,
what does him really good, and this is part of the this might be part of the writing, might be part of him, and also might be part of a low budget. But I think what works incredibly well with this is the fact that it's not every scene. It's not every
mhm.
time he's on screen he has to quip or he has to like make a joke. There are times he's just having a conversation with Jack, and it's just like there's no there's no comedy. They're just genuinely having a conversation. He doesn't like he only says a one liner when it's needed and it's spared out instead of like um the Ron Perlman version where it's like, yeah, every scene he's kind of like making a joke or kind of like keeping the energy up. This one, it's like, no, it makes it feel like it comes on more naturally because we get it more sparingly with that.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. Yeah, he definitely has the vibe of it. I will say this: the one, and again, we're gonna keep coming back to this topic over and over again. I know, but this is important. This is probably again due to low budget. I will say this is the one where I'm like, I don't think he has the physicality for Hellboy. Like, I want him to be bigger. Like, I want him to be
Mm.
bigger in the face and like big. He doesn't like he's maybe like a couple inches taller than like the other people in the movie. Like, no, I don't want Hellboy to be looking down, or at least like kind of more bulkier than like the rest of the cast. Like he doesn't, and it might also because like he doesn't have like the greatest things to fight, but he doesn't even. He only seems like a little bit stronger than like your average man. With other than the fist. Again, that's probably
So
a budgeting thing, but he
I
definitely
think that's
feels.
part of budgeting.
Yeah,
I also think it is part of it is like a comic book thing. So if you ever read the comic books, I think one thing you kind of notice is he wearing the overcoat or is he not? Usually Hellboy does look massive when he doesn't have the coat on, and usually that's because he's getting into a big fight with a monster and like his clothes are being teared off. So once the coat comes fully off, it's just him just being like ripped. Hellboy looks huge.
yeah,
That's another thing. Like I feel like they uh in both Hellboy with Ron Perlman and Harbor, I feel like if I'm especially with Perlman, not sure about Harbor, they would ditch the coat a lot and really allow him to show off the rest of Hellboy, and that's what would make him feel huge.
yeah,
Because it is the coat. And the reason I bring up the coat specifically is it kind of is a good way of getting in tune with like Hellboy's mood because like whenever the coat is torn up or whenever it's off, he's rageful, he's beating the shit out of something.
yeah. I also think like Harbor, just his
Into
face,
like
and also
the
oh sorry,
the comics, yeah, he looks slimmer, he looks lower to the ground, he just looks sadder and more pathetic,
yeah,
honestly. And I feel like that is a purposeful thing because uh, spoilers for the Hellboy comics, but a lot of times he's just kind of sad. Like he's just like he's a really he's kind of a
he's a
little
sad,
bit of a sad dude. Um
he's a sad.
and and I feel like when it comes across, especially with the comics, because it feels like every time he's wearing the overcoat, which is a lot in the comics, it is just weighing him down all the time. So I feel like in a weird way, because Jack Kessy's always wearing the overcoat and he looks a little like smaller than the other Hellboys, that kind of is what makes it work. Is the fact that like he's kind of a little dude. He's kind of a sad man, which that's another thing. Half of the stuff like Jack Kessie says as Hellboy is just really sad.
Yeah, he's
um,
really depressing.
yeah, which is that's Hellboy's character in the comics too. Is like there's definitely a sense of like self-loathing and feeling like that he is being pulled in a direction in life that he has no control over. That's kind of what Hellboy is.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely like it. It's just something that I definitely noticed through it, like starting it, and
Mhm.
because I think part of it's also like the face and like not just like the coat, but like his chest area or like the because I David Harper and I think that's also because of who the actor is. Like the actor is just a big dude, and I think you could see it in his face that like David Harper's version always felt big to me. Like he would every time he walked in a room, he had to walk in sideways because he couldn't fit through the door. And then Ron Perlman, probably because we had two movies with him, and like you said, there were times where he'd take the coat off and you could see like his like triceps and like his shoulders, where he looked bigger. Yeah, this one definitely came across as like he's just like it's like I guess I'll fight the zombies or the witches like he's kind of like half swinging for a lot of them up until like the very end. He's really not like he doesn't really get off like that. Other than I think like maybe like the opening fight, he doesn't really get a chance to kind of like show off his strength.
Yeah, not really. And I feel like that's I feel like that has to be like a budgeting. You're probably right. Like I think it is like a budgeting thing where it's just like how much they choreograph the fight because this Hellboy, he shoots his gun a lot more than the other ones. Let me tell you that much. And it actually is hitting his targets, which I think it is probably because it is like a lower budget. I was a little like we'll get into it, but whenever he got the blessed shovel,
the holy shovel,
yeah, which by the way, that's something that is in the comic book and is like a really awesome fucking scene. Man, I was really disappointed that he only gets one swing with it and it just explodes. I'm like, damn it! Like I really wanted him to like,
yeah, he got
but
two.
like I really wanted him to just have like a really good scene where he gets to cut loose and really go to town on these zombies with like the holy shovel. But it just sucks that like he basically gets that hit and then he gets a hit on the crooked man and it just kind of explodes in a really bad CGI explosion. And that's basically it.
Yeah,
but anyways,
gives it away. Yeah. But yeah, I think definitely between the three, I agree with you. This one's definitely the most comic accurate, which actually makes it like he makes it really interesting to me. Obviously, like I need to see more from it to actually like say if I like it more than Ron Perlman because Ron Perlman is that character is amazing and I would watch that character a million times. But I definitely like this one and I definitely like want to follow more and I like watch this movie and was like, dang, this man definitely should have been in a higher budget movie. Because I think he does a really good job, and I think probably like, and I'm just gonna be repeating you for half of this, but like, Alex definitely like understand, or excuse me, not Alex, Jack Kessie definitely understands this character like well, and I think he understands like his mannerisms and how he talks and how he acts, and definitely gives the vibes of just punching in, just clocking in for work, like honestly, he's just as concerned about this whole witch scenario as trying to get his little radio fixed. Which I love. I just love that subplot. Like anytime he's not talking to someone in this movie, he's trying to fix his radio.
Yeah, that is like a neat little detail there.
A little back thing.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
But yeah, like I mean, overall I think the makeup didn't really bother me. I've seen some people point out, and I do agree with them. The tail is just kind of there, and once again, I think it's just kind of bumping around. He
never does use his tail,
and I think that's because it's lack of CGI, or it's basically like because like the tail most of them be CGI, and it's definitely like I definitely think it's prosthetic because there was one point where there was like a wide shot where you can kind of see him walking around a room, and the tail is just kind of flopping there like it's not like moving around or anything like that. It's just kind of stiff.
Oh yeah,
and just bumping into stuff. Yeah, it's not a great tell. And it's pretty clear that they did not want that to have the focus.
Yeah. I honestly forgot through most of the film. I forgot he had a tail until it was like a them walking past the camera shot. And I was like, "Oh right, Hellboy has a tail." Completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
Let's move on to unless there's something else you want to talk about specific Hellboy. I was going to move on to the story or some of the other side characters.
Before we get to that, I really think we should touch, since we kind of touched about like Hellboy's physique and the makeup and stuff. I think just to get this out of the way with the budget kind of conversation, because I really want to just go ahead and get that done, because I
Yeah,
think that's going to
of
be the
course.
big thing hanging over.
Yeah,
Um,
the elephant in the room. Yeah.
I feel like this movie has a good mix of using practical effects and then having some CGI elements that aren't that bad, but there's some parts that are just really bad. The most unfortunate part, this all I could think of when I watched the movie is man, this movie really starts off on the wrong foot when they decide that they need to have a Hellboy fight against a giant spider that
Um.
does not look good. It
Yeah.
just period. The CGI spider does not look good. Whenever the spider, not only does the spider just definitely looks CG, um there's the part where it like bites off the head of like the G-Man dude. I swear to God, when that happened, he looked like he transformed into like a PS3 character. Like just
Yeah.
his head explodes and there's like computer generated like blood flow out. It's just like it's not good. And the way it's like jumping around in the forest and stuff. Like, here's the thing: I'm not the best at picking out when CGI is good or when it's bad. I know a lot of people give Marvel movies flack lately, and even for me, it's hard for me to tell you what is good and what's bad. I'm just not that in tune with it.
Uh-huh.
But even I could tell this is not good, especially since like the way Jack Kessie is running from the spider, that speed is just not matching the way the spider's jumping around. Like, like the spider seems to be moving like a little bit faster than what Hellboy is actually running at. And it just like, it just looks mismatched where it's very clearly like, oh, he's not running from anything. This is clearly something that they just told him to like kind of jog through the forest here and we'll green screen in the spider
They had a
later. So
similar thing where I think it's literally like the next scene, or maybe the scene before, where the spider is up in a tree, and it's definitely in Hellboy's periphery vision. Like his legs definitely are one, and he just like doesn't look at it. So like either Hellboy's half blind, or they just didn't map that correctly of where it's supposed to be or how high up it's supposed to be from him. Uh yeah.
yeah, like it's just anytime they go really heavy on the CG, it's just most of the time what the CG is doing is not matching up with the characters, the actors of what they're doing exactly. And it just shows. Like that's just the thing. When they do the practical effect, my opinion on this, I think most of the time when they go for practical effects, it looks good. I wouldn't
It's
say
good.
great. Like we're gonna be talking about the thing soon. It's not like the thing levels, but
Yeah, but like,
um,
that's a hard comparison.
yeah, no, but
uh,
like there's some good use of practical effects. I think of the it's funny because this is a combination of bad CG mixed with, in my opinion, actually seems to be pretty good practical.
mhm.
Um, is the part when Cora Fisher returns back to her body and starts to fill out because like she's
Oh
taken the
yeah,
form of a raccoon.
dude.
The raccoon looked awful. Just straight
Yes,
up looked terrible
yes.
as a CG thing. But whenever she's filling out her body and they're going from that like rubbery skin suit thing to it becoming a person again and it's like filling out and the bones are cracking, I'm like, that's really good. It's very weird that it just came after one of the worst looking CG
Yeah,
raccoons I've ever seen
it goes from
to like,
the worst animal ever to holy shit, this is terrifying and real. Whoa.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
that's awesome.
yeah. And I think like in general, that's kind of like the give and take is like, I do agree. I feel like, for example, like Jack Kessie was mostly fine with his Hellboy makeup. I think they could have done more with it. I agree with a lot of people on that. I wasn't too bothered by that, but I think there's some good practical effects. The Crooked Man himself, I think he looks great, in my opinion, especially with the way that he's kind of is in the comics. I think the makeup and like kind of like his eyes, the way he talks, and like the ridge on his neck where the noose was. I think the practical effects on him looks good. In terms of like makeup, costume. Um,
So
Not so much whenever he's spitting out bugs, because then that gets back to the
yeah,
CG thing.
yeah, he
It's
shoots.
like you have good practical mixed with just really bad CG, like all the time.
Yeah, and okay, I do want to talk about this, because I think because you brought it up, and I know that yes, this is what he looks like in the comics. I do like the detail of um the noose like marks on like his neck when they close up on that. I was like, that's cool. I will say, I I didn't really. I kind of almost wish he had a better villain. And again, I have no knowledge of the comics. I don't know what Crooked Man's like in comics. I'm sure he's cool. I'm sure he's terrifying. Um, but I remember thinking through a lot of this film. I was like, this villain's kind of like it's just an old man that's dead. And honestly,
That says weird things.
that says weird things. Yes. And honestly, I watched this movie. I was like, I think I would almost rather like the witch girl, like the witch girl that
Effie called.
turned,
Yeah.
yeah, that turned um what's his name, Tom Fiddle, that turned Tom Fiddle's dad to a horse.
Yeah.
I almost wish like kind of wish she was just the villain, and it was just like her, because like I feel like she had more character and more related to the more like relation to like I know like not Hell, no one has relation to Hellboy, but like when I say like the main person, like Tom's character.
hmm
And I almost kind of wish like they stuck with her and like made
So
yeah.
it's funny that you mention it because, and I do think this is a purposeful thing. Now, not that he doesn't do some intimidating things and some scary things, but the Crooked. I should probably point this out. It's very interesting that they chose to adapt the Crooked Man story of all things. And I think honestly, I think for a film with this budget, it's probably the right story to adapt.
Mhm.
Um, but the Crooked Man story, I think one of the points they are trying to make is just kind of how pathetic the Crooked Man actually kind of is. Um, because he's not really the devil, he's an agent of the devil. And he's basically is doing all this like soul collecting and giving power just to like accrue the old wealth that he had before he died. And
Yeah.
it's I will say a big one of the times basically the last act of this film is a complete departure of what happens actually in the comic book. Um in the Crooked Man comic book, basically after Hellboy hits him with the shovel, they go back to his manor and they just find the Crooked Man's true form, where he's basically this weird crab bug thing, like just weakly trying to collect all his coins, and they basically just put him out of his misery because he's like, this is the true Crooked Man. He's just this pathetic little thing.
Mm.
Um, and it's part of the running theme in the Hellboy comics. It's funny. The first Hellboy movie, Rasputin, is kind of made to be this big villain to Hellboy, which he kind of is in the comics. He does pop up a lot,
Yeah.
but the thing is they make a point that every time Rasputin would come back in the Hellboy comics, he comes back weaker and weaker and weaker, to the point where it's just like you're nothing at this point. You're just a ghost of yourself, because I think it's an intentional thing where Mike Mignola is showing that like evil and trying to attain power just makes you ultimately into a small, pathetic thing. He a lot of times he goes for a big anticlimactic fight with the big bads, because it's just kind of like, actually, like, you try to, like, basically you've used all your effort and did all these terrible things just to get a inch of power, and it meant nothing for you in the end. And I feel like that's what not saying that's what the movie was going for, but that's kind of the source material they're working with, is a villain that in the comic books is just inherently supposed to be kind of pathetic.
Yeah, he is weak. He's like a Spider-Man B villain that like
Yeah.
in a real fisticuffs, like yeah, the hero could two shot the man, but it's because they don't know it's the first time he's seeing it that makes it a
hmm
problem.
They definitely beef him up a little bit more here in the movie, which I think is ultimately the right call. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. The Crooked Man is sinister, but I do kind of get where you're coming from, where Like he's just like, especially if we compare it to like other Hellboy movies where with the villains there, he just doesn't have that strong of a presence. Um, it's interesting because like this film is definitely trying to evoke more of like this B horror film kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like, in general, I really like the tone and atmosphere that they set up here because, once again, that's something that does feel kind of close to the Hellboy comics. At the same time, the Crooked Man himself was never scary to me.
Are you talking about
Just
are you
wasn't.
talking about the comic or this? Because both. Because yes, I
Oh,
definitely agree. Was yeah. I don't
I
think it was
think he,
ever scary.
I think he has some certain moments where there's some really a little bit creepy, striking imagery. Both the comics and the movie has that, but he himself is just not very scary to me.
Yeah.
And I wish I could offer better criticism on why. I can only just speak to how I feel, and I just feel like he's just not scary.
It's not, yeah.
Like I said, I like the creepy in general with this film. It sucks because it's like I like the creepy atmosphere and tone. Like I kind of like that kind of stuff, like some of the spooky elements. Um, but even though this film is going so hard to be a horror film, it's not really a scary movie.
No,
You know,
definitely not. And like I am a big like horror fan. I've seen a lot of them, and so I definitely that's again why I think like the witch girl, she was like she had some scary moments, and she was like definitely scary. Uh, and I think like that works well with her, especially like when you start getting more into like how you make a witch ball. What is all this like weird witch stuff? And that all kind of works more into the horror elements, but yeah, not really, nothing really the Crooker Man does. Because once the Crooker Man actually shows him, starts using powers, and then that's also when like Tom gets his magic wishbone and they get the shovel and all that, and that's like now it's a superhero movie at that point. Like the
true,
first
yeah,
like I don't know 45 minutes maybe, like it was trying to be like horror and creepy, and then once they started getting magic powers and stuff, now it's an action like thriller, which is fine. But yeah, I just kind of wish Kirkman was a bit more. If you're already beefing him up in this a little bit, like I don't know, put a little bit more effort into like what he can do. Because honestly, the creepiest thing that he did, and it's very quick. It's like I think it's one shot. Um, because I guess there's technically two. There's one shot where he's just in the background smiling, and then there's a shot when like Hellboy and Tom are in the mansion and they walk into this is towards the end of the movie, so obvious spoilers, but um, they walk into the mansion and they like hear a baby crying, and then Hellboy hilariously opens a thing, sees like a food filled magnet, immediately closes it, and it
yeah,
cans back up, and Tom is just like it's a smile reference, like it's like the horror movie Smile, and Tom is just like creepily staring at his thing, and his head tilts up. I was like, that's scary because that's not the focus, and it's not like
hmm
jump scare trying to like shake the screen at you, which this has some weird editing things that I'll get into later. But I was like,
yeah,
that's what that right there, that one shot is what more the movie needed of like this idea of like possession because he owns his soul and like he
right,
collects people's souls and like that's kind of the crux of like how to make this person, even if he's not strong himself, because he owns people and because he can take over your soul, that's what makes him scary or intimidating. I think that's what they needed to like
right.
focus on more.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel you there. I do want to point quick correction. He is not possessing Tom. He is taking on his form.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's an
Tom. It
illusion.
shows later that
Yeah, Tom's
Tom was
somewhere
just
else. Yeah.
in another room. But yeah, no, I get what you mean. I think I kind of it's something I've been thinking about. I kind of wonder, is he not scary because he's talking? Because a lot of the times I feel like when we think about the stuff in horror that scares us, typically it's something that doesn't talk at all or talks very little. Like, I'm just thinking of, like, in general, the horror movies that would scare me. Something
Yeah.
like a Halloween or like Alien, where like they're not these creatures, these things aren't talking. They're just kind of there.
Yeah. The
Um,
whole idea with like, because this goes a little horror history for you, because now we're talking into my realm. The whole idea with a lot of those like villains and creatures is the less you make something talk, the more of a monster that it makes it. Because if you start understanding and sympathizing with something, you don't find it scary because you know why it's doing it.
mhm.
That's why like that's why the original Halloween. A lot of people watch the original Halloween or like well, actually, here's a great example. Yeah, a lot of people watch the original Halloween and don't find it that scary anymore because like it's not that gory. Michael's not really doing a lot or anything. But the reason it was scary at the time was because before that, when a villain like would you you'd catch him, they would explain their plan. No one had any idea why Michael was doing that, and the only explanation we get is just like he just does it and he just goes crazy at the time. It's evolved since then, but it's just kind of like this idea of just like this unnatural evil that can do whatever. And that's also why there's a large majority of people that don't really like the ending of the first Friday the 13th because at the end it's revealed that it's Jason's mom and then she starts talking and starts explaining why she's doing that. I still argue she's still
Right.
scary because she's still just like psychotic, but that's the difference of it's not so much like them not talking because you can still have someone talk like a Scream villain and have them still be intimidating, but it's the fact that they don't talk and also like you don't understand why fully they're doing this. There's no mystery with the Crooked Man. I understand everything about him and I know everything about his past, why he's here. Not really what his powers are, but that's not what makes a horror movie scary. Is that there is no mystery or like there's no fear of the unknown with him. You know everything
Yeah,
about him.
I feel that. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, I just think that like, um, I definitely agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
Because like I feel like because like I'm trying to think of like maybe there's something like where like Exorcist, for example, is like you never really directly from I can't remember the name of the demon. It's like a P name or something like that in that movie, but you never
Oh.
hear directly from the demon themselves. It's always like talking through someone.
Yeah, well, like half
And
that demon's dialogue is just calling someone the B word.
that's also true.
But it's also
But
terrifying.
like
It's coming from a child half the time.
yeah, and I feel like because you have that degree of separation there, it makes the presence even more scary because it's just like we're just hearing like basically someone relaying a message from him in a sense. Like we're not even getting the full demon himself,
Yeah,
and
you
it's
don't
like
understand.
if like
Yeah, you don't see it. Yeah.
and I so like yeah like I think so I agree. I think like it's hard to make something like the Crooked Man scary whenever he has so much dialogue, but I think he needs to have dialogue. I
Yeah.
do. Me personally, I would have to say I did like the Crooked Man as a villain, not because I found him scary. I did not find him scary, but I found him. I've just found him interesting to listen to and talk because like he has a very weird way of like talking and constantly like sort of like taunting. I don't know why this line sticks with me, but it's just like you'll suck on your mother's black teat in hell is like for some reason sticks with me in my head, and it's just like weird little lines like that just makes me think like ooh, he's like a really gross goblin, like he just look disgusting. um
I don't
and
know.
that fascinates me, but I get what you're saying where like but he doesn't have a lot of presence and he's not intimidating as a villain. I do agree with that.
I didn't really get that much to him. I even didn't find him that interesting.
Hmm.
At least like me personally. I was just like honestly, the he was cool when Tom was describing him. And I think that's what the difference was. When Tom was describing him, it was like, I saw the devil once and he didn't look like you. It was
Mm-hmm.
just, he was a man in a top hat that they used to. And like, he gives a little backstory, but just like, of this presence that showed up. And the second he saw him, he ran into the woods. And like, that's when he was like, oh, this is intimidating. This figure that just like, when he's on screen, people just run. But then he actually gets on screen and he talks, and you're just kind of like, I don't know, there.
Yeah.
I didn't find him super interesting. Like when he actually showed up. That's just me. Moving along from him, I do want to talk about the side characters, and this shouldn't be a part of the discussion because there's not a lot of people in this movie, which makes it good. Oh, and also, real quick, I will say, just because I didn't say it when you were talking about the spider earlier, I do love that this movie just starts. You don't get any background, you don't get anything. The first thing you see is the title screen, and then we're in, and then an action scene. And I'm like, even though the action
I
scene's
do.
not
I
bad,
do
I
like
do
that.
love that they're like, we're not wasting time. The reason you bought this movie, you know who Hellboy is, you know what the Bureau is. Done. Go. Movie. I'm like, yep, I like it. We're starting early. I respect this movie.
That's kind of
Yeah.
and although the start of this film is not at all like it is like the comic, it kind of does feel like that with like the way the comic short stories, because like there's the Hellboy main stories where it is like building on the lore and building out Hellboy's character and kind of introducing that background, but then there's the Hellboy short stories which is like not really focused on that. It once again it kind of assumes, or it'll allow like the story to kind of fill in you go, but where it just kind of like in media res, it just drops you in. It's just like, this is what Hellboy's up to right now. And I do appreciate the fact that this movie, yeah, doesn't waste any time. It, you know, the whole thing where they have the like with like Batman, it's like, of course, it's a Batman movie. That means we have to have a flashback of like Martha and
Yeah,
Thomas
but
Wayne getting
yeah.
shot and killed.
Uh-huh.
The equivalent of that for Hellboy is all the time is the like, oh, we have to go back to the World War II mission where they found him in like the church after the Nazis were doing an experiment. You know, I'm glad we skipped over that.
Yeah, we did. He
Like we just
referenced
like,
it. And that's what you do. You make a joke about it. Because what did he
Mhm.
say? They say he's like, you look like Tom called him like he said he looked like the devil, and he said, I'm not the actual devil. I was actually found in a church.
Mhm.
Well, you stepped in a church, must be good enough for God. You're good, and that's like
Yeah,
they're cool with them. I'm like, yeah, there you go.
and
That's all you need.
and here's the funny thing, like that actually is like I don't think Hellboy says like, I don't think Hellboy says something along the lines of, I don't think he exactly says is like, I'm not actually the devil, but he does say something in the actual comic. He does say line for line something like, I was found in like a church. And also the part where like the mountain folk like see Hellboy and they really don't react to him at all. Is like funny because they're like, I saw your face on like Life magazine or something like that. That's also a line taken from the comic book, which I also really love, where like people, unlike
I like
the
that.
Ron
Yeah.
Perlman movie, people are aware of who and what Hellboy is. They already know. And
I
it's
like
like,
that.
and
Yeah.
they kind of don't care. That's the funny part too.
Yeah. I actually really like that about this movie, and like, there's a little bit. They kind of like teased with it also, like the David Harper one. Like people still knew him and they reacted to him, but in this one they're just like, "Oh, you look weird." All right. Anyway, yeah, there's this boy having a seizure on our floor, and like that's more interesting to them.
Yeah, and it's because they have like the actual stakes of like actually wanting to like care for a child in their community than versus like
Don't care that much about
I
that kid. I want to point out, like they're not
yeah
looking too hard to help
that
him.
is true, yeah.
But like, yeah,
It's because
I love that he's just a part of the world, and people just accept that. Yeah, weird things happen in the world. Like he's one of them. He's actually the better ones of them. So like, yeah, who cares? I like
yeah,
that.
I also Yeah, I also think and granted, I don't think they say it directly, but I think another reason why like they don't really care too much about Hellboy is another thing that's kind of made clear from the get go in this world of Hellboy is that he's from the government. And I imagine a lot of these mountain folk are just kind of like, oh God, he's like, to them, they probably don't even care the fact that he's a demon. It's like, oh man, it's one of them government types.
Yeah.
I come up into the mountain and it's just
They
like
react
fair.
to him the exact same way a tax collector would show up. They're like, "Ah, this fucking guy."
Yeah,
Like,
it's
yeah,
just like
that
great.
I like.
Um,
I love
but
it.
yeah, I like that. We're talking about characters, and I want to get into a couple of things. So for the most part, all the characters that show up here in the film are from the comics.
Okay,
That is in the Crooked Man comic.
gotcha.
Um,
Very important
which
for you.
yeah, the I will say the Crooked Man comic, like all the characters that showed it, except for Hellboy himself, are one-off characters. That is the same case here. All these characters only show up one time, and that's like in that comic book. The only character that was not in the Crooked Man comic that shows up here, and is actually a completely new character, is Joe, the new field agent. Um, she is not at all in the Hellboy
Oh yeah,
comics.
yeah, yeah. I that one I kind of got. Yeah, I kind of assumed like this character was supposed to be like the Liz equivalent, but they didn't want to use Liz again because her powers would kind of win.
It's interesting because you say that she's like the
Oh right,
Liz. I mean,
forget
yeah,
Liz isn't like actually with him in the comics. That's a movie thing.
yeah,
Yeah, I forgot.
yeah.
That's right. No, you're right. I forgot about that. This is why I have the
I
expert
think
on.
I think it's like Kate or something in the comics with him. But anyways, that's besides the point. That's a whole different character.
Genuine
I
question, though,
think,
real quick, because it's
yeah,
very important. I don't want to forget to ask. In the comics, is it explained why Tom Fiddle is just barefoot the entire time?
no, I think it's just a mountain thing. I'm like,
Brown
we're
person in
fighting
his
with.
shoes? Well, except for like the crazy witches, but like he has every other
I
piece of clothing.
Yeah,
He
I think
dresses
it's just
normal
like
except
I
that.
think well, like here's the thing: is like some mountain people might do, but I also think it's set in 1959. It's in the mountains. Not everyone can afford shoes. Tom might just be poor and doesn't have shoes, or maybe he just likes nature or something like. I don't know.
Yes,
Either way, he just doesn't have shoes.
but that's a thing in the
It's
comic too, right? Like,
Yeah, no, that I'm pretty sure from what I remember the comics, he also doesn't have shoes there, and I think that's just it. They don't really bother to explain it, and I think there's a couple of different things you could come up with a reason. Like I said, this is 1950s in the mountains of Appalachia. Not everyone can probably afford shoes, so that might be a reason why.
I just watched this
Or
whole thing.
maybe he just prefers to be out of shoes. Like you already kind of get a sense that in his childhood he liked to be in nature since he'd like run off to do his own thing and stuff like that. Maybe just feels more
Practice
comfortable
witchcraft.
without him. Um, but yeah, going back to it. Um, Actually, I'm glad you bring up Tom because I think I'd rather focus in on him first than Joe.
Yeah,
I think
same.
what made the Crooked, and I think they do the smart thing too here. What makes the Crooked Man comic book work so well with that story, and what also makes this story work, in my opinion, is Hellboy kind of isn't really the main character of the story. It's actually Tom.
Yeah,
Tom is,
Tom's issue.
yeah, and I'm glad that I think they give Hellboy they definitely give Hellboy more to do in this movie, but I'm glad that they kept most of the focus on Tom because I feel like what makes the Crooked Man story work is it is a story about a person who is trying to get redemption, wondering if he's even worthy of redemption. Because there's a lot of like themes about like sin, and it's just like, can you do anything to actually make up for your sins? And even though Tom and like basically Tom was just was ignorant and like got involved with forces that he shouldn't have, and he's largely paid the price for it. You know, he's lost his family to this thing. He's lost his lover Cora Fisher, you know, like to this thing.
I do love the
So
line of like, he made this deal when he was a kid. There's no way that's binding. And then both Reverend and Hellboy is like, actually, no, that is pretty binding, though. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
He's kind of did that. I'm like, just dogpiling
And
on him.
but I like is like Tom is like is like largely a good person, and like he is selfless. Like he does both in the comic and the movie show a willingness of like if it means that it can protect these people and not have them in harm's way, then I would be willing to lay down my life. But Hellboy, and I think it's also this way in the comic books too. Hellboy is kind of like, listen, noble sentiment, but this guy's not going to follow through on anything he just said.
Yeah. He's like, there's
um,
no way that we're doing that,
yeah.
but good idea. Good on you.
Yeah, and that's what I really like about and that's what I like is like keeping the focus on like the having the story really be about Tom and not necessarily Hellboy. That's what makes it work. Not and it still makes it a good Hellboy story because there's a lot of ways where Hellboy kind of undergoes the same. We talked about this earlier where like sometimes we have characters like see another person's story and it forces them to reflect on their own path, their own story. And I think that's what happens here is basically Hellboy has to reflect on his own nature and his own place in the world while also seeing this other person go through their struggle.
Yeah.
Um
Because I think also like
and we'll
that
get it.
is. Oh, sorry. I think that is also like kind of more like realistic to how things, because like yeah, like a detective or cop won't have a personal relationship with every case they do, but like when they do these they can see themselves in there and reflect off it. I think that works really well because the whole point of Hellboy is that yeah, he comes in and fixes his problem, like fixes other people's issues, like as like a detective or kind of like a fixer, whatever, like this blue collar worker. And I think that works very well where it's like, yeah, not every, like, I know, like, he's like, oh, he's going to bring about the apocalypse or whatever, but, and that's like why this movie is like so opposite of the Ron Perlman one. It was like, no, yeah, like, this story really has nothing to do with, like, the story of, like, the witches and the Crooked Man and all that. Like, it has nothing to do with Hellboy. Like, yeah, his mom was a witch too, but, like, that's barely related.
Right.
And like, yeah, I think that works for it. Of just like he's like, no, I'm here to fix someone else's issue because that is what my job is to fix something else. And I think that works really well. It's like he relates to Tom and like can better himself through it. But yeah, the fact that this isn't his story, he didn't cause this mess, and this really, if he wasn't there, like life would continue onwards.
Mhm.
Without him, I think works. I think works really well in this. And I would imagine also in the comic that this is based off of.
Oh yeah. And I think that's the strength of it. In general, I like this cast of characters, much like how I liked them in the film. Cora Fisher is kind of brief, but I think you kind of do need a character to kind of like showcase the consequences of the witchery stuff, like getting involved. And sadly, that's her paying the price for it.
Yeah.
Because like in the comic book, Cora also dies.
Yeah, shocker. I don't know.
That
I
being said, though,
can't even. Can't even
she
imagine.
comes back at the end of this movie, right? Like I didn't make that up, right? Like I'm pretty sure Cora Fisher is like back to no,
No,
that's Effie Kolb that they found.
no.
Yep,
Yeah,
she's
they
still
found the
dead.
bad witch. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, she's dead. Which I'm not gonna lie, I was a little confused how she died in the first in that. But I think also I was
Mhm.
just confused all because when Hellboy's fighting that CG snake, um, I guess is this the snake's power that like its tail can become its head? Because I swear there's multiple times where he grabs it by the head, throws it away, and then it appears again like behind him with the head. I was like, is this a fucking night crawler of a snake? What is this thing?
Yeah, the snake part. So here's the thing. I don't think there was a snake. If I remember correctly, because what the scene is referring to, the snake is not in the comic book.
Okay.
Actually, in from what I remember, how it happened in the comic book, and it's been a bit. It's bugs, lots of big bugs.
You know, I see why they didn't choose that because the one time they
Yeah,
did bugs, it was awful.
yeah. So it was, if I remember correctly, it was something like and that scene also in the comic book is very dreamlike in how it's resolved. Because what happens is like they hear some story about these witches in the mines and stuff like that. and as they're going through this area that they're walking through, and then suddenly like Ify Kolb gets it like is suddenly in a lot of pain, or not Ify Kolb, Cora Fisher's suddenly in a lot of pain, and then if I remember correctly, bugs burst out of her, like these big large ones, and Hellboy's fighting them, and then he gets knocked out, and then he just wakes up, and Tom just tells him that like I use my lucky wishbone to get us out of there, and now my soul definitely belongs to the Crooked Man now if it didn't before.
Yeah.
Which is a line that he says. It's very weird because, like I said, you don't actually see Tom use it in the comic.
Okay.
He just says that he used it.
I was also wondering because he also just said like, "Oh, I used the wishbone." I was like, "How the fuck did you know how to do that? You said you've never done this before. How did you know that would work?" But I mean, again, like that's. I don't think that's an issue with this. Yeah, that's just how it is.
If my guess would be with the snake is, I think the idea that they were trying to go with the snake is it was the never ending snake. You know, you hear the story of Ouroboros, the serpent that devours itself from the tail.
Yeah.
But it's constantly like regenerating itself. I think that's what they were trying to go for here. Especially since like they do the whole thing where like the snake is crawling out of like Cora Fisher's yeehaw, you know, and then like going up and going into her mouth,
and then back through her leg.
Yeah, and then coming back through her mouth again. It's just like I think the idea is like the Ouroboros, the snake consuming itself. But yeah, that part was I didn't really quite get it. I didn't quite get the snake part either.
Yeah, I was also okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one that was confused because whenever I was watching, I was like, what the fuck just happened? Wait, and then because then he shot in the head, and I thought like, oh, is his tail gonna grow another head? And then it did, and I was like, what the fuck was that thing?
Yeah.
But
so that was just like an odd part.
It was weird, but yeah, kind of back to the witches. Yeah, well, I guess yeah. Well, I think now we move on to the brand new character to this
Joe,
yes. I thought she was fine. It was okay. Again, talk about the elephant in the room for this one. That romance was short. Like there was, I thought like they were friends. I did not get this, like when the Reverend like said the line like, "Oh, he is afraid of something. He's afraid to confess his feelings to you." I was like, "What? What? That was?"
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
What?
See, and that's weird because it's like from what I thought in like the comics that I thought they were going to be going, because like in the comics, like Hellboy does have like a relationship with like the agents, as in like he does like a lot of times they do die on these missions, but I think he does try to like protect them as much as that he can, because he's like, I'm the big dude, I can tank this stuff. I don't want I don't want you guys to go down.
You're fucking
and so like I do agree with that, where I'm just like, that's kind of like that's just such an odd thing. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, which is weird because like because you mentioned you think that she's kind of like the Liz of the movie, and now I think that's like, yeah, some of the supernatural elements with her character, and the fact that I guess there's a romance with her. Like it's like, okay, I see what you mean. What I thought she was supposed to be, weirdly enough, is I thought she was basically supposed to be kind of like, her role in the film was supposed to be like that of Myers from the first film, Agent Myers, where you had like even though she's not new to the BPRD, you have a character that is
like used to the lab. That is
fresh to the lab, and also, to be honest, much like Myers' job is like they're supposed to be the ones that ask the questions for the audience. They're the audience stand-in. We're just like, what the hell does this mean? And it's just like that. Then they get the explainers and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I felt like that's what her role was supposed to be.
Yeah, I felt the same thing because I'm like, oh, they do the thing where they basically kill the Myers equivalent in the opening, so now she's gonna do it. Because yeah, that definitely was what that guy was. So it's like, oh yeah.
So she's supposed to be like the Myers now, but
yeah,
like,
it's like, what's a witch ball? Like like like, oh, this is weird. Like
Hmm.
the every even though like Hellboy's the everyman, but like the audience surrogate, like she's also new to this world. But now she's the romance interest. Which I mean, I guess
Yeah,
you
and
oh,
yeah, and that's like it's just such an odd thing. I wouldn't be opposed to it either if it was just something that I felt like would have been set up earlier. I also don't think this movie needs it. That's another thing. Like I really, with how short this film is, I don't think it needed a romance subplot inserted into the third act of the film. I just don't think it's necessary.
dude, I can tell you how much it isn't necessary because I guarantee you, like, other than you take the scene where the Reverend references it, and then the scene at the very end where like after that weird again editing thing with the helicopter, and then she like hugs his arm. Then it's
Hmm.
like you take those two out, the film's exactly the same. That's the only.
Yeah.
That's why it's like I almost don't even. I can't be like too mad at it because like yes, it's definitely shoehorned in, but like it's the most shoehorned thing ever that like it's barely in the movie. It is literally
Yeah.
the third act and the very last thing. Like
I also hate the fact that it's sort of in because especially with the way it kind of Hellboy in the comics is because it largely gets it right. It feels weird that the movie kind of makes it feel like that, and I don't think it's the intention that they meant to go for. But the message it gives to me, it's like, oh, the only reason Hellboy would ever give a shit about one of these people is because he's in love with them. And it's like that's not true. Like Hellboy gives a shit about a lot of people that he is not in love with in the comic books, and it's just like it's weird. It's such a weird thing to throw into this movie, and I just didn't feel like it was necessary at all.
yeah, so if we could just like kind of headcan this, and it could just be like what if just like the Reverend just like was wrong? Like he just made that up, and then at the end she's like, "Ooh, maybe like I'll try to snooze you up to kill Hellboy." He's like, "Oh, I guess she likes me. Okay, cool."
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
Hellboy
could be.
actually doesn't like her in that way.
Yeah. How do I feel about Joe? I don't think she's all that bad. I think there's a couple of decent humorous moments actually that she has with Hellboy that works pretty well. We talked about the squashing scene earlier that
Yeah.
I actually did kind of like. It's just like, no, squashing's good. Um, and I do appreciate that he does kind of have a B, BPRD buddy to kind of like bounce ideas off of, like kind of keep the audience in the loop of what's going on. I think that can be kind of helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I definitely.
but overall,
Yeah.
what was that?
I do like her inclusion in this because like even though like yes that is like kind of annoying when it's like overdone. It's like especially like a Hellboy thing when this is like the new Hellboy. It's like I like that we're just kind of starting in the world, but it probably is good to have someone that's like explaining a little bit about what's happening.
Yeah, kind of keep the audience in the loop of like, yeah, what the hell is going on
Yeah.
here? I think that's a good idea. But also at the same time, I do think with it, like in a perfect world, if we didn't have her inclusion as the character and we just had what was happening in front of us and we didn't fully understand or grasp what was going on, kind of like how it is in the comic book, I feel like that would make it feel more mysterious and unsettling as a film. We already talked about how this film has an issue with actually being scary, and it's not really most of the time.
Yeah.
But I feel like if she wasn't here, maybe the movie would feel a little bit more scary. Maybe with like if we didn't have those like little explanations of what was going on, maybe it would add to the mystery in the film.
Man.
But that's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know because she is the only one
I
that
don't.
would actually be. I feel like she was the only one that would like. Well, maybe Tom, but like the only one that's like
Mhm.
actually scared during this event because like Hellboy's not really getting scared through this. Tom has his magic
Mhm.
thing. Reverend
And
can't
the
see
Reverend just
anything.
doesn't give a
He
fuck.
doesn't give a thing. He's already blind. The only time he gets scared is when they give him his sight back. It's like, whoa, 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 no, 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 we're not doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Also,
do like
something I
that.
just
That is.
realized. We'll get to Reverend because he's the last one, but like something I also just realized. You know what would actually been a really good scene, and I feel like was like just kind of didn't really do a lot with it. It's pretty good, but it's like over so quick. It's like when they're actually in the mines, and I just thought about you now have the two weakest characters. One blind, one is supposed to be like the audience surrogate, and you're in a dark mine shaft and they get attacked by crows and a giant spider. That scene should be scary. Why is that not scary? It has a cool effect of Reverend getting his eye like ripped out. I was like, that's cool. But like, yeah, that scene should have been terrifying. But like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not really even that dark down there. Which makes the line Reverend said not really make sense. And I feel like, yeah, that should be the film becomes a horror movie again. Because like, okay, your two magic users aren't there anymore. You don't really know how to use it, and now you're getting attacked by the monster. Now you should be
Right.
Yeah, now this should go back to a horror movie. I know that's like it's probably a weird name, but that's just when I thought about it, like that should have been her scene, like where she's like, but instead, what that scene is an excuse to shove in the subplot of like, or the love story at the end. It's like, no, this should be the moment where you're like terrified for this character.
Yeah, and also that's another thing is the mines, the way they're treated in this film is very different from how it is in the actual comic book. Again, I like I said, the third act of this film is just basically does kind of go off on its own thing. Some of it good, some of it not so good. And I think the mines were a misstep. So in the original comic book, they never go inside the mines, but they do talk about them, and they talk about how like many years ago there was like a mine collapse, and they believe that down there are these other witches that were trapped all these years, and now they're calling out and doing the crooked man's bidding, and they sick the big bugs onto Hellboy and Tom and Cora.
Yeah.
And it's and I liked it, and I'll be honest, I liked it better in the comics because they never go into the mines. They never deal with those witches. It's just something that's there that fucks them over in the comic books. And here it's just like, oh, we're actually going down to the mines. And I feel like that's kind of a misstep. Also, another thing, Reverend lives in the Reverend lives in the comic book. So it's a shame that they killed him off here.
Yeah.
And especially since I actually really like the Reverend both in the comic book and the movie because the dude, because the dude is a badass. Because the guy is just so devout to his religion that he's like, I do not give a fuck.
Yeah.
It's like you can't give me anything, devil. I don't fucking want it.
Sorry,
And he does it.
I can give you your eyes. Get these eyes out of my face.
Yeah, and it's
I
like
protest you. I love him.
I love that, and I also love the scene that, and this is also something pulled right from the comic as well. Is whenever he inscribes the cross with the lucky bone, onto the shovel, and he's given like that whole big hype up speech, where just like, I'm gonna squeeze the evil out of this. That is line for line, and also in the comic book, and it's done so well and so well acted there. Like he's just so the Reverend is an over the top character in the comic, and he is an over the top character here, and I love him for that.
Like this shovel has buried every grave in this cemetery. If it don't got holy in it, I don't know what does. Love him.
I love that.
He's so good.
He's so. I do like too whenever she's like laying out, and this is a new line for the movie, but I really like whenever she's laying out her plan or whatever to him, and he just like listens, just like, are you out of your motherfucking mind? I love that.
Oh, it's so good, bro. I literally paused the movie because I was dying laughing.
Yeah, no, it's like the Reverend is. He was my favorite.
I knew the line was coming. It still cracked me.
Yeah, it's just like the Reverend is my favorite character, my favorite side character from the story, both in the comic book and the movie. So they did him really well. The actor was probably my favorite secret standout.
Oh, he's so good. Oh god. Your evil can touch my holy land. Sorry.
But I think I think we've largely touched on a lot of the characters, and
Yeah.
like I said, I think that is a strength. Even Joe, who there is some problematic stuff with like the subplot elements. I did like her enough outside of the subplot. I think she brought much needed like I said, she's not my favorite character, but she at least brings some much needed like information and some back and forth with Hellboy that does add to the story. So
It also
it's
does
nice.
help in a movie like this to like have because it's a thing that's like a rule that I learned in comedy where it's like you need a character that is you either need a crazy world and a sane character or a sane character or excuse me a crazy world and a sane character or a crazy character in a sane world. And this is a crazy world. And I think in a movie, you do kind of need the sane guy, like the regular person. And in the comics, that's Hellboy because we know Hellboy. We've established who he is. That like, yeah, he looks like that, but he is like still like kind of the everyman. In this, because Hellboy is like new, quote unquote, and like also kind of weird. You do kind of like for this movie need like the regular person to react to like the crazy things that are happening. So like kind of like I don't know, give a little humanity to the film. Like when I think about like the scene where um is Fisher is the good witch, right? I think yes.
Cora Fisher, yes.
Cora Fisher, yes. Where she's coming back as a raccoon and like her body's getting filled out, and that's a like a super cool scene and like a really cool vibe horror, and she like almost throws up like watching it. She's like, "Oh my god!" And like Hellboy's about to shoot it because it's gross. He's like, "No, no,
Yeah.
no,
Elmo's
no."
like, fuck this shit. He immediately sees that. He's like,
Like
fuck
she's
that.
disgusted by it, but she's also like, "Nope, I don't think this is actually evil." And I was like, "No, that works." Like, yeah, you need one character to almost throw up at the disgusting thing. Like, not everyone could be the cool guy just staring at it.
Yeah.
Because especially like when you have one character that's like not as strong and kind of like reacting like that, it does kind of make the others bigger. Like, yeah, her reacting that way makes Hellboy look cool because he is just like the, yeah, this shit's fucked, but man, like I've seen worse.
hmm
Uh,
But yeah, no, I agree with that. So, but yeah, overall, like, I think it's helpful to have like whenever you have like and I think you get this a lot with horror movies, just the way they are, usually small cast of characters.
yeah, makes everyone more
And
memorable. Yeah,
yeah, and so it really helps to have like a smaller cast of characters, and it does make it a bit stronger for that.
no, definitely. Like, let me go through. I think that's we've so yeah okay so we've talked about we talked about the world, we talked a little bit about the story about Hellboy himself, and all the characters, and yeah, I definitely agree that like having this kind of very small cast makes everyone stand out a little bit more. We've actually kind of gone through all like the points that I wanted to talk about, but I'm sure you definitely want to talk about more before I ask about like kind of the future of Hellboy stuff.
Yeah. Though so I mentioned this earlier, and this is the one thing I really kind of want to like focus on. Actually, this is not just an adaptation of one comic. This is actually an adaptation of two comics. And I'll admit, The Crooked Man's not my favorite Hellboy short story. It's fun. I like it. It's not my favorite one. But, and I didn't know this going in, it does actually happen to adapt one of my favorite Hellboy stories, which is The Chained Coffin. This is the story about Hellboy's mother.
oh
Um,
right, yes, this.
and how they actually integrate it into this film is not bad. I wouldn't say it's ingenious, but I would say it's like, okay, it's not a bad way to kind of give a little bit more backstory into Hellboy's origin. And I think how they do it is mostly decent. Um, so in the Chain Coffin, what that story is it's another Hellboy short story, and it's about Hellboy going back to the church where he was found in, and he's kind of like looking for answers. And it's all, and how the story is told is it's told as like a letter back to Abe Sapien, saying like, hey, sometimes after like a big case, I like to go back here and try to clear my head. And what happens is that night, whenever he goes back to the church, he falls asleep and he has a dream where he basically sees his mother. And what happens is his mother, his mother was a witch who consorted with one of the dukes of hell. And but later in life, she did turn into like a nun. And so whenever she's about to die, she asks her uh her son and her daughter, who is a priest and a nun, to basically be like, hey, when I die in 3 days' time, the Duke, not Satan, but, and I can't remember his name because it's one of those big ass long names, but the Duke of Hell that I consorted with is going to come and try to get my soul. So chain my coffin up. And basically, if he can't claim my soul in 3 days, then I get to go to heaven or some shit. Obviously, that doesn't happen. It's actually kind of fucked up because what happens is the Duke of Hell comes in, and basically they're like, "Begone, begone, demon! The God has power here in this church," and he just fucking straight up kills them, which is no surprise. But what's kind of fucked up is like, is that like how quickly Hellboy's mom just kind of gives in to him. Where basically he's like, I've come to reclaim you, my bride. And then she's like, you can make me young again. It's like, yes, I can make you young again. But then she only says one thing. It's just like, but you killed my son and my daughter. And he's like, forget them. They're nothing but dust now. And she's like, okay. And it's like, what the fuck? It shows that Hellboy's mom is not a good person. Even when she quote unquote tried to kind of redeem herself, she's very quickly like, oh shit, well I guess I can be young again.
No point crying over spilled milk. They're already dead.
Yeah, and it's like, but don't worry, she gets her comeuppance. So yeah, she does get dragged to hell. She actually gets in the comic book, she gets a fucking hook ran through her, and basically she is like hung over like a pit of fire. And that's actually where she gives birth to Hellboy, is like hanging from a fish hook over like a fiery pit. Fun stuff. Yeah. Anyways.
I guess that's why there was like chains, but like in that one shot of baby Hellboy, there were like chains and stuff. That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. And so how they did it in here is mostly decent for the most part. I think what I like about it too is it's pretty much like, it seems to be like a hallucination that Hellboy is kind of like familiar with. And basically it's like none of this is actually happening. It's like the Crooked Man trying to manipulate things to Hellboy. But I do like that they adapted it. And I think the way they adapted it and tried to make it work with like the Crooked Man story, where like that second time it happens, he's basically trying to trick Hellboy into like killing himself. And he doesn't follow through with it, which is smart because he kind of picks up like something's not right here.
I think in the movie also like Joe, like whatever spell Joe does, like kind of breaks his hold on him, and that he kind of snaps out.
That is true.
Because he after this thing he blinks and the gun's at his throat. He's like, oh no. And then
but I like that. I will say that does add a little bit more to the Crooked Man that I think he kind of needs to be a little bit more. It makes it more believable that he can take on Hellboy, is like he tried to trick him.
Yeah. And that's kind of what, like, that was what I was saying earlier. I wish kind of more of that was more of what the Crooked Man's like power was, of just like he's illusions. Like that's his, and he's trickery and illusion and like tricking people into making deals, and like that's his whole stick. Like he shows people visions, and like that's when you can be scary.
Right. And I like that, and I agree, and I think that's a good way of adapting the chained coffin story, which, like I said, it's my favorite short story just because when you actually read it and the art and with Hellboy's narration, it is just such a, I wouldn't say super horrifying story, but it is just like a creepy little story. And it's also just sad. It just makes you even more sad for Hellboy. Like,
Yeah.
shit, this is your mom. And I know he said consorted with the devil, and he kind of makes it think it just like a long time ago, like I put life inside you. Surprise, surprise, that Duke of Hell also that's Hellboy's dad.
Yeah, I kind of figured that one.
So,
Yeah, I kind of put
yeah.
1 + 1
The
equals
one
2. I figured it out.
So obviously, they don't. So obviously, they don't bring in Hellboy's half brother and half sister technically because they're not. They don't obviously don't show up here in the movie. But also the big change is in the comic book. It is basically a huge demon that like basically looks very similar to Hellboy, where it just busts down the church door and like takes Hellboy's mom. Where here they just made it like a giant crow, which thematically works. There's a bunch of like usage of like crows representing like
Yeah,
demons, like the Crooked Man himself here. So like it works here. It's a bit of a shame. I won't lie. There was a part of me that's like, oh, I kind of hope they do the big, but there's no way they could.
dude.
There's
To
no way
try
they
that
could do
because the way they did the big crow is just shoot a crow close up and then just like green screen that.
blow it up.
Yeah, blow it up.
Yeah,
But like, dude, if they tried to do a big demon, like, or tried to show like Hellboy when he's taking over the apocalypse, it would have looked awful. Like,
yeah, no, it would. With this
like,
budget, absolutely not
with this
possible.
budget, yeah, there's no way they could have pulled that off. I'm fine with the crow.
Yeah. Like just the fire effects that they had on her alone were already really rough as is. Like that was terrible too. So yeah, no, I agree. But I will say, like, and then I think that's just all I wanted to add is just that, like, I felt like this was the right balance of like two Hellboy stories mixed in a way that makes sense as well. Where it's like this is a story dealing with witches, and hey, Hellboy's mom was a witch.
Yeah.
In the Crooked Man story, Hellboy does make that mention of like my mom was a witch too, but that's about it. That like it's not really goes any further than that.
Yeah.
So I like its integration here. I also think this is a much more balanced way of doing it versus like Hellboy 2019, which was like 5 different Hellboy stories all crammed together.
Yeah. It was his origin, a bunch middle, and the end. And I was like, all right, so this is your opening, which is cool. Ron Perlman's only hinted at the ending, and you guys are just doing it. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and it's a crazy story that they tried to do. So yeah, that was nuts. But
yeah.
I do like this. I do like this story.
So
I like how they handled it.
Last kind of question I will ask you about this film, with you being the resident Hellboy expert, is other than this and other than Chained Coffin, which honestly probably could still work as its own story, like actually like go and like show the brother and like what really happened. But that'd be kind of to not tread on old ground, and just so you don't have to talk about it again.
I will add this much about the Chain Coffin. I think this might the only other way it could work is it could not be a full film. It would have to be like a short film because the Chain Coffin is literally like 10 pages. The Chain Coffin is 10 pages long. It is not a long story.
Yeah, but my question is, what story or short story, like obviously like not the end and not his origin, but like what are there any other Hellboy comics that come to mind for you now that you kind of see the format of this film where it's like, yeah, it's kind of a shorter film, might be lower budget, but it's like it shows kind of like the day in the life of Hellboy. Are there any other like stories that you would kind of want to see or multiple stories in like one film, kind of like how this one was?
Oh man. I think here's the deal. I really like there's something about the Hellboy main stories is a lot of them are self-contained stories, but then they have the little hints of the overarching plot of where it could be going, like a Rasputin. And I still would love to see an adaptation of that to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Let me think.
Yeah, it can't be a main story, but yeah.
I think one story that it's not really like one specific story. I think it was called like Absolute Colossus or something like that. But one story I would really like for them to adapt is because it's a character that people don't get to see a lot because a lot of people are obviously familiar with Liz and Abe Sapien. Those are like fan favorites already, which absolutely they are great characters in the comics, and the versions that they've shown in movies are also great.
Abe's
One, I think it's called like Absolute Colossus, and one story that I would really like to do is basically Almost Colossus. That's the name of the story. Almost Colossus.
Yeah.
Introduce us to Roger the Homunculus. Roger, the name is funny as fuck to me, and it quite literally it is because they meet a homunculus, where Hellboy first kind of fights him, but then they kind of like he realizes like, oh, I am like a person, I can make my own choices. He ends up helping Hellboy and Abe out, and basically kind of becomes another part of the team with the BPRD, and basically they're like, you need a name. It's like, I don't have a name. It's like, and I think Hellboy just literally says like, we'll just call you Roger. So it's just Roger the Homunculus.
I think I've seen a comic panel from this one. I swear I've seen this. I'm just like, because
he's such a fun.
Because he say something like, I am Roger, or like something like that. Yeah. I think I've seen this exact panel. I know what you're talking about.
In a way, he's kind of like, because he's learning to be alive and human, he has a very blunt and direct way of looking at certain things. It actually makes him very fun and innocent and kind of like just funny. Yeah. And he's kind of like, minus the revenge background type thing with him, he's kind of like the Drax of the group. I would love I would like something like Almost Colossus and bring in Roger the Homunculus, because I think people would love him. I think people would love Roger.
I think that's because I think I also I swear because I've seen a couple different Hellboy panels. Like the panel where they realize they don't have to fight is so funny too. Because it literally is just a thing where they're just like, wait a minute, why are we doing this? He's like, I don't know. Thought you were evil. No. Oh.
I thought you were.
Okay.
And yeah, I would love that. Yeah. I would love for them to do it. Now, granted, that one also is a bigger, because I think they do end up fighting a even bigger, the Colossus, the giant homunculus, which, oh my God, the budget on that. Like, first off, I think it would have to come with a caveat, like the other Hellboy stuff needs it needs like a bigger it needs a bigger budget. I think another short story that could work really well, one that like an actual short story that's kind of like its own standalone thing, is called Into the Silent Sea, where it is basically a horror ghost ship story. And I'm trying to remember this because it's been a few years since I've read it, but Into the Silent Sea, from what I remembered, it's during this period where Hellboy has kind of been disillusioned at the BPRD, and he basically leaves it to explore around the world. There's a point where, where basically he is like sailing the sea, gets lost in like a storm or something, and then he basically ends up back in time on like a 1700s ship, and then there's like weird ghost stuff starts happening, and like that's a really fun story. So I would love to see Into the Silent Sea to be also adapted, because that would be fun.
Yeah,
that would just be really fun.
I definitely kind of want to see. I just want to see, more. I don't know like the Hellboy stories, so I can't like talk about this, but like, obviously, like, the cry for another Ron Perlman Hellboy will, like, always be heard forever, even though I'm pretty sure Del Toro has already said, like, yeah, it's probably not happening.
Yeah.
But I
really wish, I at this point, I don't, obviously there's no way in live action, because I think Ron Perlman is just, like, he's too old, and, like, shouldn't have to put him through that kind of stuff now. I would really like, I think the best case scenario is we get us like a animated, like either one season or a animated movie wrapping up Del Toro's take on Hellboy.
Yeah, that probably is fair. Yeah.
Yeah, man, because if they could do like a Samurai Jack where they do like, hey, we're doing like one 12 episode type deal uh for Hellboy, wrapping up his story in the Del Toro universe, absolutely. I would take that.
Yeah.
Um that would be
Anything in
cool.
that universe, I would never say no to. That's great. I love the first one. I would honestly, I probably might even argue I like Golden Army more, which is the second one.
No, I'm kind of the same way too. I feel like and it's weird because it's like it's more adventure-y story. It's more goofy, but I also think it has a lot more. It has even more character and heart to it, even to its antagonist. So I really like Golden Army as well. I do. I agree with you there.
But no, I obviously like the cry for that is definitely that will always be heard. But I wouldn't be mad about more like I didn't even look at the studio that was made this one, but like more from this director. I want to see more from Jack Kelsey. I This movie does have issues. A lot of that is because of the budget. But like these guys like that made this definitely know Hellboy and like know this world well, and I would love to see more of it. But the issue is, like this movie was not. It was like barely marketed. Like you said,
Yeah,
we didn't even find out about it until like months later, and then like even when it did come out, I had to keep looking up like where is this thing coming out of? I only It just came out straight to like streaming, like a rental, and like not even like it didn't even do a thing where it was like oh a straight to Netflix movie or like a straight to streaming platform thing. No, it was just like no, you just have to rent it on Prime, and like I feel like so few people are gonna see this, but it's like really good. Um,
yeah.
Especially like I mean, it's definitely for Hellboy fans. Like it's definitely for people
Oh
that
yeah.
like that. But that's a lot of people. Like even if you just know the movies like me, this is a good time. Um,
The and I will say this sentiment, and it is not a unique sentiment at all because I've seen a bunch of it online. But I do largely agree with this. This does kind of feel like almost like a pilot or a snapshot episode of like a Hellboy TV series.
yeah,
And yeah, I
I
kind of
almost
would
got like
like something
student
like that.
film vibes from it. To be
Yeah,
honest,
yeah, like a fan film. Yeah,
yeah,
no, I
I
get
got
that.
fan film vibes from it. Yeah,
Um, but I feel like hopefully maybe the budget was so low that like the amount because like I kind of stayed in tune a little bit with the Hellboy community and largely like a lot of them are like it's a pretty decent film. Some of them do want to take it to extremes of like this is the best Hellboy movie or this is the worst one. It's like I don't think that's the case for either.
no,
Um I think this film has a lot of good ideas, and I really think that I do one of its strengths is how faithful it is to the comics, and I definitely think there is a fan base that is hungry for a more faithful adaptation of the Hellboy comics. I think they would eat up something like this.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like I think that just I think obviously the next thing is they need more budget and also just lessons learned from this film. Um,
mm,
if you can make it cheaper and on practical, probably do that. That's one of the lessons I do. Another thing is you were mentioning editing issues, and I agree. I catch what you mean.
oh
There was a weird thing at the end where it's like one final jump scare where they get to the phone, it's a relief, they're finally getting out of there, and then it just like does a sudden cut to the helicopter and it's like sinister music and the camera's shaking. I'm like, why is it like this? Why is it like this at all? And it turns out there's nothing going on. They're just in the helicopter and they're leaving, and it's like, oh, okay,
yeah,
this is weird.
and they did
Like,
that
why was this?
because
Why did they make this like a jump scare?
yeah, it's the same music for like every time like the Crooked Man does something, and like I never like that shot in anything. Horror movies do it all the time, where it like shows something creepy or something supposed to be messing with your mind, and like they just grab the camera and go, and I'm just like, all right, calm down. You know,
Yeah,
what are we doing? I guess the idea of it is that like, oh, Hellboy's because it's referencing like the fact that like Hellboy's still a monster, but I was like, that really wasn't the vibe of this, so I don't know why they did that.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that was the intention. And either way, it really did not work. So yeah, I agree with that. It's it's an odd choice. It's definitely an odd choice.
But
Um,
yeah, other than weird
but
ending
like it,
things, yeah,
I guess it's since you're asking about the future of Hellboy and movies and stuff like that. Obviously, I would like a wrap up for Del Toro's thing, but I almost consider that like a whole separate thing from Hellboy itself because it's like
yeah,
Del Toro has such a unique take on that character that it's basically its own thing to
yeah,
me. Um, but outside of that, I would love to see maybe another attempt to try to adapt more directly the comic book storylines of Hellboy. Um, and maybe that is the thing. Maybe it's not a movie. Maybe it is a television show. I'll be honest with the amount of comics and stuff like that and how much varying lengths they can have with the stories. It might be a better fit for TV than something like that.
yeah,
Um, and the reason I want it so much is like all the different stories, all the different characters, but also just imagining like the last season of Hellboy being Hellboy in Hell, which is such a beautiful and heartbreaking end to the character, and bringing that to like making that a whole like season long thing would be my absolute dream. I would love something like that because Hellboy in Hell is, I think, what makes Hellboy work so well. And I'm definitely not the first person to make this comment. Like, it's definitely a lot of other content creators and fans have said this before. But one of the beautiful things of what makes Hellboy's story work so well is that it does have a definitive ending for that character, and that is in Hellboy in Hell. And it's such a beautiful way of like how they wrap up that story, and it's heartbreaking too. It still sticks with the tragedy of what Hellboy's character is. Um, and I think like if they adapted that to TV, like no joke, it would be in the vein of something people would be like, "Fuck!" It's like last season of Breaking Bad for them, you know? Like that's because like how deep they dig into that character and bringing it to his natural conclusion, it's beautiful. So that would be my dream. Is I guess what I'm saying is my dream would be a Hellboy TV show, animated or otherwise. Um, and I honestly, yeah, I think Jack Kelsey is good. I would not mind him coming back as the character. I think I certainly think there's some things that can be worked on, but but as he plays the character more and as he gets more comfortable in the role, I think he could do the character justice in that regard.
yeah. I agree with that. I want to see more from this team. I want to see more from him, and yeah, this already kind of gives vibes of a TV show. Like this just felt like a long episode of a TV show, and I'm like, I can take the, yeah, I would take this. This I would definitely watch this like on whatever this like why Max hasn't picked this up. HBO Max is beyond me, but no, definitely.
Right.
And yeah, that is kind of like in my closing thoughts. The best thing I can say is just like, yeah, like it has issues and it's not perfect and it's not like the best Hellboy media out there, but it's definitely worth watching, especially if you are a fan of the comics.
Yeah, I think the
And
tough
it's
part is
super short
because
too.
it's
Like
not.
it's very like I'm pretty sure this podcast is longer than than the movie.
No, you're right.
We're an
It
hour and
absolutely
50
is.
in. Yeah, we've passed how long the movie is. It's super
Um,
short.
but I will say that like I think kind of the things that did work against it, and I understand why maybe not people are checking out, is the cost of entry. As you said, like this is not really on a specific streaming service like this. I mean, I found on Amazon Prime, but like even if you have a Prime prescript subscription, doesn't mean you can just watch the movie. So you have to rent or buy it. And I think even though 6.99 is not that high of a cost to me personally, I do think as a Hellboy fan, I think for most audience members, they're basically be like, that's way too expensive for a rental. I'd rather just try to find something else. Like it's Halloween, I'll find something other spooky. Hell, I'll just
Yeah,
go watch the original Hellboy, like something like that. So it
yeah.
sucks,
Well, a
but
lot of people are just going to be like, I'll just pirate it, which is probably what's going to happen to this film. Like,
Yeah, but hey, you know what? I will say this much too. I'm pleasantly surprised. This is way more than I was expecting. I was pretty confident that like we would never get another Hellboy thing, period, after the 2019 movie. I was pretty sure that movie killed any chances of another Hellboy film coming out in my lifetime.
yeah,
I'm actually pleasantly surprised that that it still managed to happen.
that's
Um,
good. Yeah.
I would say the team behind this, everyone, the writers, the director, the actors, even the special effects team, like some stuff with Spidey, but I get it. He had limitations on budget. Um, I think they should be proud of what they made here. Is it the perfect thing in the world? No. And I don't think it's going to be anybody's like top movie of the year or anything like that. I'm a big Hellboy fan. It's definitely not going to be my top movie of the year. But I think they should be proud of this. I think they had limited resources and they managed to put something together that felt like it had genuine like heart and effort like put into it. And while it definitely suffers from those budgetary limitations, it did the best of what they could. And in a weird way, it in a weird way, and this is just trying to bring it full circle. They accomplish what they seem like they set out to do, which is, hey, wouldn't Hellboy also work as like kind of like a B horror film? And it's like, yeah, it would. I think they proved that Hellboy can work as that.
Yeah. So definitely go out, watch the film. I know this film, like when it initially came out, got mixed reviews, but I think also because like a lot of people, this film isn't for everyone. It's definitely for Hellboy fans and fans of the characters. Like it doesn't try to like
Mm-hmm.
explain anything, which might be what lost some audience, but I think that it works as a strength for it. So I say, yeah, definitely check it out. Um, and before we wrap up this little talk about not just the Crooked but Hellboy himself, Seth, I want to ask you: do you have any fresh picks of the week for this little movie review that we have? This is where we talk about
Yeah,
whatever we've been watching, playing, or listening to when we're not doing this podcast. So, Seth, what is your fresh pick of the week?
yeah. So my fresh pick is not too long ago, about like a week or so ago. I went and watched Transformers One in theaters.
Hmm, same.
Yeah, which I think it's a good thing I probably caught it now because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be in theaters much longer. Um,
That's my favorite
because
now. Yeah.
yeah, it's been in there for a while, and I also think it didn't do too hot. I mean, I don't really know, but from what I've heard, apparently that film is not done too well in
Um,
theaters, which is a shame.
It did. So it's actually that's a weird scenario because it actually did do. It didn't do well critically. It did pretty decently with audiences though. It kind of got a bit of a
Okay, that's good.
resurgence. It was just the initial reviews weren't a lot, but once audiences started watching it, and especially Transform, kind of actually similar to this. Once Transformers fans got to it, they were like, "Wait, this is awesome!" So it did kind of like
Okay,
start getting
good.
more of a following.
Because I know because I started like because admittedly I saw the trailer for it initially and I'm like, oh cool, Transformers One, this will be definitely something I check out, and then I kind of stopped paying attention to it. I didn't know till later after I'd seen the film that like apparently this is supposed to be the first in like a prequel trilogy for Cybertron and all that. I I really liked it. I think as a prequel film, obviously its strength is showing like the relationship between like Megatron and Optimus, or as they are here in the film, Orion Pax and D16. They do a really good job with it, especially since it's none of the OG voice actors. It's like Chris Hemsworth as Optimus Prime, which is such a weird thing, but I don't know if you thought this, Drew, but like, did it feel like towards the end of the film, Chris Hemsworth started to sound a bit more like Peter Cullen?
Yeah. No, I think he definitely like because when he actually does the thing, yeah, he
Mhm.
definitely. I think both him and oh, I can't remember who does.
Brian Tyree Hill.
Yes, who does Megatron? I'm just gonna call him Megatron. Um,
Mhm.
I think both of them. Yeah, towards the end, they're actually like, oh yeah, now they're starting to be the old voice actors, which I think is good. I think that showed progression. The only character in that voice acting wise that I didn't fully sell on, which is unfortunate
Oh,
because
I know.
you know exactly what I'm
Yeah,
talking about. Yeah, I
yeah.
love him. I love him. He's hilarious as a comedian. He's great. But Keenan from Keenan Peele, I don't know why they chose him for Bumblebee. That just didn't.
Keegan Michael Key.
Yeah, Keegan he
Yeah.
just didn't match Bumblebee for me. Bumblebee to me was supposed to be like the kind of like the youngest member, and like I don't mind him being high spirited and all that, but like, and I get it's a kid movie. I didn't find.
Very talkative. Yeah,
Yeah,
like maybe a little bit more. And I know that like
he
they
was
kind of
talkative, and
they
also
make
like he didn't do anything with his voice. Like Bumblebee definitely still sounded like a 45-year-old man, and I'm just like, okay,
yeah. I think and I agree with that. I think I also agree that like he was kind of like really annoying for me, but I hate to admit this, but like by the end of the film, I did like warm up to him. Like, okay, I'm fine with this. Like I still think like some of that humor is grating, and it's weird because it's like it's almost like it's supposed to be kind of on purpose because like they make a big thing of like when Orion Pax and D16 first meet Bumblebee, they're kind of like, oh god, this guy.
yeah,
um, but yeah, like that I do agree that like I think it felt like a miscast at first, but over time I did warm up to it and I liked it enough. But I do agree that like his is a we could call it an acquired taste. At least on my part, or you just don't acquire that taste at all. You just kind of like, yeah, this is just awful.
yeah. I just he was the I liked the film. I thought it was good. He was the one
Mhm.
part of it I was like, I didn't really need that, which sucks. 'Cause actually, I like Bumblebee as a character, like in most media.
Mhm.
I just wasn't for me in this one.
Yeah, I will say one thing I would warn for people going into this, like if they've seen the trailer and if you're a big Transformers fan, is if you're thinking this film is largely going to be about Optimus and Megatron like fighting each other, um, just know this film is that stuff doesn't really happen until like the last 15 minutes of the movie, I would say.
Yeah,
And even then, I think 15 minutes might be generous. It might be the last like 7 minutes of the movie,
probably.
honestly.
Yeah,
But because this film is it's not a because like it gets there, but it's not about them fighting each other. It is about their friendship. And also this film is not about the fall of Cybertron. That's another thing. I think I accidentally went into this movie thinking like, oh, we're gonna get into the fall of Cybertron. No, this is way before that. This
yeah,
granted, you can kind of see how this would be the path that does lead to Cybertron's downfall, but it's not we're not there yet.
yeah. We're
We are far
nowhere
from that.
close. Yeah, they have to actually have a
Yeah.
civil war, and then that'll happen.
Yeah, but I like their but I guess the thing I want to get to is like I like the characters. I like the take on the characters in this prequel form of who they were before. I also I like even though it's a kids film, I like the amount of world building that they managed to accomplish with this about like Cybertron and Iacon and like their war with the what are they called again? The weird
oh,
kind of
the
bug
Quintessons,
formers.
the Quintessons.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
the quintessons. Yeah. I liked all the world building around that. And also just the animation was just really solid too. Just this take on what Cybertron looked like and just the look of the Transformers themselves, having that classic feel to them, but also adding a little bit more, sometimes feels like quite literally polish to them.
mhm,
It works really well. I really like it.
yeah. It's definitely a good
Um,
film. All right. With that said, um, great film. I will also talk about a film. I've seen a lot. I think the one that I will talk about, not my most recent film, um, but one that I was actually like, pleasantly surprised by, and it's spooky season, so I'll talk about it. Smile 2. I had mixed feelings about the first Smile movie. I thought it was basically a worse version of the same film, It Follows. Similar concept, creature that only you can see chases you, and tries to make you go insane and kills you, and then spreads to the next person. but I think Smile 2, first off, most horror sequels are like hit or miss. This one definitely worked out really well. I think it did its concept way better. I thought the characters were more interesting. It had genuinely creepy moments. It still did have like one too many like jump scares in it, but it actually did, which is unfortunate because I know you know how to do proper like creepy and scary moments because you do it in the same film and then later still do a jump scare, which is a bit annoying, but that's that and like it's a bit long are really my only complaints with it. The film is done super well. It's shot interesting. It's creepy. And it has like a really interesting twist as well, which is fun. And like some stuff that like you definitely won't see coming. So yeah, I definitely recommend Smile this come October season if you want something new horror wise. It's worth time. And I was not the person that normally would recommend this. I didn't really like the first Smile movie. I thought it was kind of cheesy and like it relied too much on jump scares and didn't really use its concept super well. Um, and Smile 2 kind of fixed majority of those issues. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I kind of feel like when I think of Smile 1, to me, it felt like the people who really like it seem to really only talk about like the last part of the movie where it goes like really off the wall. And uh, does that make sense? Like, because it's like, if you know kind of how like the film ends, but like that kind of like reveal
Yeah,
seemed to be the only thing people really talked about with that movie, which is like, okay, that's great, but like there's a whole other chunk of the first Smile movie
yeah,
that seemed to be just kind of like bog standard horror type stuff.
yeah. And this one, I think it does. I think it improves on that. Where like, yeah, the rest of the film is interesting, and it also still has its like cool ending. Uh, Again, bit of a pacing issue. Like it's a 2 hour long horror movie, or I think it's actually over 2 hour longs. And for a horror movie, that's really long. And it's because it does have a lot of shots where it just holds on the main person, like you get her reaction, which is cool. Probably could tighten it up a little bit, but that's getting nitpicky here. I definitely think it's worth it, especially come spooky season. So yeah, that is our fresh books, and that is Hellboy, Crooked Man. So Seth, I want to excuse me. Seth, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about your probably favorite franchise. I know it was very difficult for you.
Yeah, it is no problem. I really enjoyed this. I know that like, especially with like Hellboy, he's one of those comic book characters where sadly just don't get that many opportunities to talk about him.
Yeah,
Um, so this is yeah, hopefully this can like one way or the other this will open up more opportunities to talk about him, whether it is new stuff coming out or maybe we just talk about the other movies that came out.
maybe. Well, we might do some Hellboy related things, and also the animated movies are out too, and those are really good. I don't know if you saw those or not, but I like
No, but yeah, no, I do need to make time to watch the animated movies. I've actually not seen them, but
them.
I know that they're out there and they're free too. That's the crazy part.
They're pretty good. They definitely lean more into the Ron Perlman like kind of world versus like the comics. Like it definitely is like they're trying to copy that kind of style because Abe's there, lives there, and Cowboy's more quippy. Um, but they're fun. Anyway, that's a different podcast. Definitely want to thank you, the listeners or watchers, if you're watching this on YouTube. Appreciate you. Thank you for watching and stay safe out there. Goodbye.